Roy Marcus Cohn stands as one of the most controversial and influential figures in 20th century American politics and law. Born on February 20th, 1927 in the Bronx, New York, Cohn would grow to become a master of political warfare, legal manipulation, and media manipulation whose tactics would fundamentally reshape American political discourse. His life story reads like a dark mirror of the American dream, revealing the shadows cast by ambition, power, and the relentless pursuit of influence at any cost. Cohn's career spanned some of the most turbulent decades in American history, from the Red Scare of the 1950s through the cultural upheavals of the 1960s and 1970s to the rise of modern conservative politics in the 1980s. Throughout these changing times, he remained a constant force of disruption, controversy, and strategic brilliance. His influence extended far beyond the courtroom or the political arena, reaching into the worlds of media, business, and high society. What made Roy Cohn particularly significant was not just his individual actions, but his role as a teacher and mentor to future generations of political operatives. His methods, his worldview, and his ruthless approach to achieving victory would be passed down to protégés who would carry his influence well into the 21st century. Understanding Roy Cohn is essential for understanding how modern American political warfare developed its current form. The man who would become known as one of America's most feared and effective political operators began his life in circumstances that would shape his entire worldview. His story is one of intelligence channeled toward destruction, of talent used for manipulation, and of a brilliant mind that chose the dark arts of political combat over more constructive pursuits. Roy Marcus Cohn was born into a family that embodied the contradictions and complexities of mid-20th century American Jewish experience. His father, Albert Cohn, was a prominent judge on the New York State Supreme Court, a position that provided the family with significant social standing and political connections. Albert Cohn was known for his integrity and legal acumen, qualities that would create a stark contrast with his son's later career choices. Roy's mother, Dora Marcus Cohn, came from a wealthy family with extensive business interests. She was an intensely ambitious woman who doted on her son and instilled in him from an early age the belief that he was destined for greatness. Dora's influence on Roy was profound and lasting. She taught him that winning was everything, that rules were for other people, and that loyalty was the highest virtue. These lessons would become the foundation of his entire approach to life and career. The Cohn household was one of privilege and expectation. Roy grew up in a world where political power and social influence were taken for granted. He was exposed from childhood to judges, politicians, and other powerful figures who treated the family home as a gathering place for New York's legal and political elite. This early exposure to power and its mechanisms would prove formative in shaping his understanding of how the world really worked. Despite the family's wealth and status, Roy's childhood was marked by a deep sense of insecurity and a desperate need to prove himself. He was small in stature, intellectually precocious, and socially awkward. These characteristics, combined with his mother's relentless pressure to excel, created a young man who was brilliant but deeply troubled, ambitious but fundamentally insecure. Roy's relationship with his father was complex and strained. Albert Cohn represented the old-fashioned values of legal ethics and judicial integrity that Roy would later reject. The elder Cohn was respected but not feared, principled but not particularly powerful in the ruthless world of New York politics. For Roy, his father's example represented a kind of weakness that he was determined to avoid. The young Roy Cohn showed early signs of the characteristics that would define his later career. He was extraordinarily intelligent, with an exceptional memory and a gift for rapid analysis of complex situations. He was also manipulative from an early age, learning to use his charm and intelligence to get what he wanted from adults and peers alike. Teachers and family friends noted his ability to argue any side of any issue with equal conviction, a skill that would serve him well in his legal career. Roy Cohn's educational journey reflected both his intellectual gifts and his impatience with conventional paths to success. He attended the prestigious Horace Mann School in Riverdale, New York, where he excelled academically while developing a reputation for arrogance and social climbing. Even as a teenager, he showed an unusual interest in politics and power, often boasting about his family connections and his own future prospects. After graduating from Horace Mann, Cohn enrolled at Columbia University, where he completed his undergraduate degree in just 2.5 years. His academic performance was outstanding, but his social behavior continued to raise eyebrows. Fellow students remembered him as brilliant but abrasive, someone who seemed to view every interaction as a contest to be won rather than a relationship to be built. Cohn's time at Columbia Law School further revealed his exceptional intellectual abilities and his troubling personality traits. He was one of the youngest students ever admitted to the law school, and his professors recognized him as possessing one of the most acute legal minds of his generation. However, they also noted his tendency toward ethical flexibility and his apparent belief that the law was merely a tool to be manipulated rather than a system of justice to be served. During his law school years, Cohn began to develop the network of contacts that would prove crucial to his later career. He cultivated relationships with professors, fellow students, and practicing attorneys, always with an eye toward how these connections might benefit him in the future. His ability to charm and manipulate older, more established figures became evident during this period, as he managed to secure internships and opportunities that were typically reserved for more experienced students. Upon graduating from Columbia Law School in 1947 at the age of 20, Cohn was too young to take the bar exam under New York state law. Rather than wait, he used his family's political connections to have the age requirement waived, allowing him to begin practicing law immediately. This early example of using influence to circumvent rules would become a pattern throughout his career. Cohn's first job was as an assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York, a position he obtained through his family's political connections. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan was one of the most prestigious prosecutorial positions in the country, and it provided Cohn with an ideal platform to showcase his talents while building the reputation that would define his career. As a young prosecutor, Cohn quickly distinguished himself through his aggressive tactics, his willingness to take on high-profile cases, and his exceptional courtroom skills. He possessed a rare combination of legal brilliance and theatrical flair that made him devastating in cross-examination and compelling in argument. His colleagues recognized his talent, but were often disturbed by his apparent lack of ethical boundaries and his willingness to do whatever it took to win. The case that would catapult Roy Cohn to national prominence and define his public image was the prosecution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg for conspiracy to commit espionage. The Rosenberg case became one of the most controversial legal proceedings in American history, and Cohn's role in it would establish him as one of the most feared and effective prosecutors of his generation. The Rosenberg case emerged from the broader context of the Cold War and the growing fear of communist infiltration in American society. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were accused of providing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, a charge that carried the death penalty under the Espionage Act of 1917. The case was assigned to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, where the 23-year-old Roy Cohn was selected to serve as one of the lead prosecutors. Cohn's involvement in the Rosenberg case revealed both his exceptional legal abilities and his willingness to use any means necessary to achieve victory. He worked tirelessly to build the prosecution's case, conducting extensive interviews with witnesses, analyzing complex technical evidence, and developing the legal strategies that would ultimately lead to the Rosenberg's conviction and execution. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of Ethel Rosenberg's brother, David Greenglass, who claimed that the Rosenbergs had recruited him to provide atomic secrets to Soviet agents. Cohn played a crucial role in preparing Greenglass for his testimony and in shaping the narrative that would convince the jury of the Rosenbergs' guilt. Throughout the trial, Cohn displayed the courtroom skills that would make him legendary. He was relentless in cross-examination, brilliant in his legal arguments, and utterly convinced of the righteousness of his cause. His performance during the Rosenberg trial established him as one of the most effective prosecutors in the country and brought him to the attention of powerful political figures who would shape his future career. The conviction and execution of the Rosenbergs in 1953 was a triumph for the prosecution team, but it also generated enormous controversy that continues to this day. Critics argued that the evidence against Ethel Rosenberg was weak and that the death penalty was disproportionate to the crime. Supporters of the prosecution maintained that the Rosenbergs were guilty of treason and deserved the ultimate punishment. For Roy Cohn, the Rosenberg case was a defining moment that established his reputation as a fierce anti-communist warrior and a brilliant legal tactician. The case brought him national recognition and opened doors to opportunities that would have been impossible for someone of his age and experience under normal circumstances. However, it also established him as a polarizing figure who would be forever associated with one of the most controversial legal proceedings in American history. The success of the Rosenberg prosecution also revealed important aspects of Cohn's character and methods that would define his entire career. He showed a willingness to use any available evidence, regardless of its source or reliability, to achieve victory. He demonstrated an exceptional ability to manipulate public opinion and media coverage to support his position. Most importantly, he revealed a fundamental belief that the ends justified the means, a philosophy that would guide his actions throughout his life. The success of the Rosenberg prosecution brought Roy Cohn to the attention of Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, who was building his own reputation as the nation's leading anti-communist crusader. In 1953, McCarthy hired the 26-year-old Cohn as chief counsel to the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, a position that would make him one of the most powerful and feared figures in Washington. Cohn's appointment as McCarthy's chief counsel marked the beginning of one of the most controversial periods in American political history. The McCarthy hearings, as they came to be known, represented an unprecedented exercise of congressional power to investigate alleged communist infiltration of American institutions. Cohn's role in these proceedings would establish him as the mastermind behind McCarthy's most effective attacks, while also setting the stage for his eventual downfall. Working alongside McCarthy, Cohn developed and implemented the tactics that would define the era of McCarthyism. These included the use of guilt by association to destroy reputations, the manipulation of classified information to support public allegations, and the strategic use of media coverage to amplify the impact of congressional investigations. Cohn's legal training and prosecutorial experience made him particularly effective at crafting cases that would be devastating in the court of public opinion, even if they would not hold up in a court of law. The partnership between McCarthy and Cohn was extraordinarily effective in the short term. Together, they destroyed the careers of numerous government officials, academics, and entertainment industry figures who were accused of communist sympathies. Their investigations created a climate of fear that led to the blacklisting of suspected communists and the general suppression of left-wing political activity. Cohn's methods during the McCarthy era revealed his mastery of what would later be called political warfare. He understood that the goal was not necessarily to prove guilt in a legal sense, but to create enough doubt and controversy to destroy his targets' reputations and careers. He was skilled at using partial truths, innuendo, and carefully timed revelations to maximize the damage to his opponents while minimizing the legal risks to himself and McCarthy. The relationship between McCarthy and Cohn was also notable for its personal dimension. Despite their professional collaboration, the two men had very different personalities and approaches to politics. McCarthy was often drunk, unpredictable, and prone to making reckless statements that created problems for their cause. Cohn, by contrast, was disciplined, calculating, and always focused on the strategic implications of their actions. The beginning of the end for the McCarthy-Cohn partnership came with their investigation of the United States Army, which led to the famous Army-McCarthy hearings of 1954. The hearings were sparked by the Army's refusal to provide preferential treatment to G. David Schein, a wealthy young man who had been hired as an unpaid consultant to the subcommittee and who was widely believed to be Cohn's romantic partner. Cohn's relationship with Schein became the Achilles heel of the McCarthy operation. His efforts to secure special treatment for Schein, including attempts to have him commissioned as an officer or assigned to preferred duties, created the appearance of impropriety that the Army was able to exploit. The Army's counterattack against McCarthy and Cohn focused on these apparent abuses of power and helped to turn public opinion against the subcommittee. The Army-McCarthy hearings were televised, bringing the McCarthy-Cohn methods into American living rooms for the first time. The hearings revealed Cohn as a skilled but ruthless operator who was willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goals. His performance during the hearings was technically competent but emotionally cold, creating an impression of calculating ambition that disturbed many viewers. The climax of the hearings came when Army Counsel Joseph Welch delivered his famous rebuke to McCarthy. "Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?" While the comment was directed at McCarthy, it was widely understood to apply to Cohn as well, who was seen as the strategic mastermind behind the senator's most controversial actions. The Army-McCarthy hearings marked the end of the McCarthy era and the beginning of Cohn's transition from government service to private practice. The hearings had destroyed McCarthy's effectiveness as a political force and had seriously damaged Cohn's reputation as well. However, they had also established Cohn as one of the most skilled political operators of his generation and had taught him valuable lessons about the power of media and the importance of controlling public narratives. Following the collapse of McCarthyism and his departure from government service, Roy Cohn faced the challenge of rebuilding his career in the private sector. The controversy surrounding the Army-McCarthy hearings had made him a pariah in many circles, but it had also established him as a formidable legal and political operative who could be valuable to clients willing to associate with him. Cohn's transition to private practice began with his association with established law firms that were willing to take advantage of his skills despite his controversial reputation. He initially worked with firms that specialized in defending clients accused of communist sympathies, a natural extension of his government experience. His insider knowledge of investigative techniques and his relationships with law enforcement officials made him particularly valuable to clients facing government scrutiny. However, Cohn's ultimate goal was to establish his own law firm that would allow him to operate with complete independence. In 1956, he founded the law firm of Sachs, Bacon, and Bolin, which would become his base of operations for the next 3 decades. The firm specialized in criminal defense, civil litigation, and what might be called crisis management for wealthy and powerful clients who found themselves in legal or public relations difficulties. The law firm that Cohn built was unlike any other in New York. It operated more like a political campaign organization than a traditional legal practice, with Cohn serving as both the chief strategist and the public face of the operation. The firm's success was built on Cohn's ability to use his legal skills, his media savvy, and his extensive network of contact to achieve results that other lawyers could not match. Cohn's approach to private practice was revolutionary in its integration of legal strategy with public relations and political maneuvering. He understood that winning in court was only one aspect of achieving victory for his clients. Equally important was managing public perception, influencing media coverage, and using political connections to create favorable conditions for his clients' cases. The client base that Cohn assembled reflected his unique position in American society. He represented a mixture of legitimate businessmen, organized crime figures, political leaders, and entertainment industry personalities. What these clients had in common was their need for someone who could navigate the complex intersections of law, politics, and media to protect their interests. Among Cohn's most notable clients during this period were several prominent figures in organized crime, including members of the Genovese and Gambino crime families. His representation of these clients was controversial, but also highly effective, as he was able to use his legal skills and political connections to help them avoid prosecution or minimize their sentences when convicted. Cohn's success in representing organized crime figures was based on his understanding of how the criminal justice system really worked. He knew which prosecutors could be reasoned with, which judges were most likely to be sympathetic to his arguments, and which media outlets could be influenced to present his clients' cases in a favorable light. This knowledge, combined with his exceptional legal skills, made him one of the most effective criminal defense attorneys in the country. As Roy Cohn's law practice grew and prospered, he simultaneously developed a parallel career as one of New York's most influential power brokers. His law firm served as the headquarters for a vast network of relationships that extended throughout the city's political, business, and social establishments. Cohn's ability to navigate these interconnected worlds made him an invaluable resource for anyone seeking to achieve their goals in the complex environment of New York politics and business. Cohn's influence in New York was built on his mastery of what political scientists call relationship politics. He understood that real power in the city was not held by elected officials or corporate executives alone, but by those who could broker relationships between different centers of power. His law firm became a kind of neutral ground where politicians, businessmen, judges, and even organized crime figures could meet and negotiate. The physical location of Cohn's law firm reflected his strategic approach to power. The offices were located in Midtown Manhattan, convenient to both the courts and the centers of political and business power. The firm's reception area was designed to accommodate the constant stream of visitors who came to seek Cohn's advice, intervention, or assistance. The atmosphere was more like that of a political clubhouse than a traditional law office. Cohn's daily routine during this period revealed the scope of his influence and the complexity of his operations. He would typically arrive at the office in the late morning, after spending the early hours on the telephone with contacts throughout the city. His day would be filled with meetings with clients, conversations with journalists, and phone calls with judges, prosecutors, and political figures. He would often work late into the evening, attending social events where he could maintain and expand his network of relationships. The social dimension of Cohn's power was particularly important to his success. He was a regular at the city's most exclusive restaurants, clubs, and social gatherings. His ability to move seamlessly between different social circles made him a valuable connector for people who needed to reach across traditional boundaries. He was equally comfortable at a society charity gala and a political clubhouse meeting. Cohn's influence extended beyond individual cases and clients to broader policy and political issues. He was regularly consulted by political leaders who needed advice on strategy, media relations, and crisis management. His insights into how the city's power structure really worked made him an invaluable advisor to mayors, governors, and other elected officials. The business community also recognized Cohn's value as a strategic advisor and problem solver. He was retained by major corporations and wealthy individuals who needed help navigating regulatory challenges, legal problems, or public relations crises. His ability to mobilize resources and influence across different sectors made him particularly effective in complex, multifaceted situations. Cohn's role as a power broker was not without controversy. Critics argued that his influence represented a corruption of the democratic process, allowing wealthy and powerful interests to circumvent normal legal and political channels. Supporters countered that he was simply operating within the existing system to achieve legitimate goals for his clients. The extent of Cohn's influence during this period was perhaps best illustrated by his relationship with the New York media. He maintained close relationships with reporters, editors, and publishers throughout the city, providing them with exclusive stories and inside information in exchange for favorable coverage of his clients and causes. His understanding of how to manipulate media coverage was far ahead of his time and would later influence the development of modern public relations and political communication. One of the most significant and enduring relationships in Roy Cohn's career was his mentorship of Donald Trump, a young real estate developer who would later become president of the United States. The relationship between Cohn and Trump began in the early 1970s and continued until Cohn's death in 1986, spanning some of the most formative years of Trump's business and public career. The Trump-Cohn relationship began when Trump's father, Fred Trump, was facing a federal investigation into discriminatory practices in the family's real estate business. The Department of Justice had filed a lawsuit alleging that the Trump Organization was systematically excluding African American tenants from their apartment buildings, a practice that violated federal fair housing laws. The Trumps needed an aggressive lawyer who could mount an effective defense against the government's charges. Roy Cohn was recommended to the Trumps by their regular attorney, who recognized that the case required someone with Cohn's particular skills and connections. Cohn's reputation for taking on the federal government and his experience with high-profile civil rights cases made him an ideal choice for the Trump defense. The case would mark the beginning of a relationship that would profoundly influence both men's careers. Cohn's approach to the Trump housing discrimination case was characteristic of his methods throughout his career. Rather than simply defending against the government's charges, he launched a counterattack, filing a lawsuit against the Justice Department for defamation and seeking damages for harm to the Trump Organization's reputation. This aggressive response was typical of Cohn's philosophy that the best defense was a strong offense. The legal strategy that Cohn developed for the Trump case was ultimately successful in achieving the family's goals. While the Trumps were eventually required to agree to certain changes in their rental practices, they avoided any admission of guilt and were not required to pay significant financial penalties. More importantly, from Cohn's perspective, the aggressive defense had established the Trump Organization as a client that would not be easily intimidated by government investigators. Donald Trump was deeply impressed by Cohn's performance in the housing discrimination case and began to seek his advice on other matters. The young Trump was ambitious and eager to expand beyond his father's outer borough real estate empire into the more glamorous world of Manhattan development. Cohn's connections and strategic advice would prove invaluable in helping Trump achieve these goals. The mentorship that Cohn provided to Trump went far beyond legal advice. He taught Trump the importance of never backing down from a fight, the value of controlling media narratives, and the effectiveness of using aggressive tactics to intimidate opponents. These lessons would become central to Trump's approach to business and, later, to politics. Cohn also introduced Trump to the world of New York power brokers and connected him with the political figures, journalists, and business leaders who could help advance his career. Trump's early success in Manhattan real estate was facilitated by introductions and endorsements that Cohn provided, as well as by the strategic advice that helped Trump navigate the complex world of New York politics and business. The relationship between Cohn and Trump was also significant for what it revealed about both men's characters and methods. Cohn saw in Trump an ambitious young man who was willing to take risks and fight for what he wanted. Trump saw in Cohn a powerful mentor who could teach him the secrets of success in the ruthless world of New York business and politics. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, Cohn continued to serve as Trump's lawyer and strategic advisor. He helped Trump navigate various legal challenges, provided advice on business strategy, and continued to expand Trump's network of influential contacts. The relationship was mutually beneficial, with Cohn gaining a prominent and successful client, while Trump gained access to one of the most effective legal and political strategists in the country. The Trump-Cohn relationship began to deteriorate in the mid-1980s as Cohn's health declined and his legal problems mounted. Trump, who had always been sensitive to public perception, began to distance himself from his former mentor as Cohn's troubles became more public. The relationship ended definitively when Cohn was diagnosed with AIDS, and Trump, fearing association with the disease, refused to provide the loyalty that Cohn had always demanded from his clients and protégés. Throughout his career, Roy Cohn operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal, ethical and unethical. His aggressive tactics and willingness to push boundaries eventually led to serious legal troubles that would plague his later years and ultimately contribute to his downfall. The various investigations, prosecutions, and disciplinary actions that Cohn faced revealed the extent to which he had stretched and broken the rules that govern legal practice. Cohn's legal troubles began in earnest in the 1960s when he was indicted on charges of conspiracy, bribery, and fraud in connection with his representation of various clients. The charges stemmed from allegations that he had used his influence to fix cases, bribe officials, and engage in other forms of corruption. While Cohn was ultimately acquitted of these charges, the trials revealed the questionable methods that he had used throughout his career. The most serious legal challenge that Cohn faced came in the form of ongoing investigations by the Internal Revenue Service into his personal and business finances. The IRS alleged that Cohn had engaged in tax evasion, money laundering, and other financial crimes over a period of many years. These investigations were complicated by Cohn's practice of mixing his personal and business finances and his use of complex financial structures to hide assets and income. Cohn's response to these legal challenges was characteristic of his approach throughout his career. Rather than cooperating with investigators or attempting to negotiate settlements, he launched aggressive counterattacks designed to discredit his accusers and complicate their cases. He used his media connections to portray himself as the victim of political persecution and mobilized his network of supporters to defend him publicly. The tactics that Cohn used to defend himself against legal challenges were often as controversial as the original allegations. He was accused of intimidating witnesses, destroying evidence, and using his political connections to influence the course of investigations. These allegations, while difficult to prove, reinforced his reputation as someone who would stop at nothing to protect himself and his interests. In addition to criminal investigations, Cohn faced ongoing disciplinary actions from the New York State Bar Association. The Bar Association received numerous complaints about Cohn's conduct over the years, alleging violations of professional ethics, conflicts of interest, and other forms of misconduct. These complaints led to several formal investigations and disciplinary proceedings that threatened his ability to practice law. The disciplinary actions against Cohn were particularly significant because they addressed not just individual instances of misconduct, but the pattern of behavior that had characterized his entire career. The Bar Association's investigations revealed a systematic disregard for professional ethics and a willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his goals, regardless of the impact on the legal system or his clients. Cohn's financial troubles were another major source of legal problems during his later years. He had always lived beyond his means, maintaining an expensive lifestyle that required constant cash flow to sustain. His law firm's finances were chaotic, with client funds often mixed with personal expenses and business operations. This financial instability made him vulnerable to investigations and gave his enemies additional ammunition to use against him. The pressure of ongoing legal troubles took a significant toll on Cohn's health and personal relationships. He became increasingly paranoid and isolated, trusting fewer people and becoming more erratic in his behavior. His once formidable network of supporters began to distance themselves as his problems became more serious and his ability to help them diminished. Despite these mounting problems, Cohn continued to practice law and represent clients until very late in his career. His determination to continue working despite his legal troubles was partly motivated by financial necessity, as he needed the income to pay for his defense and maintain his lifestyle. It was also motivated by his fundamental belief that backing down or admitting defeat would be a sign of weakness that would destroy his reputation and legacy. The final chapter of Roy Cohn's life was marked by his battle with AIDS, a disease that carried enormous stigma in the 1980s and that forced him to confront the contradictions between his public persona and his private life. Cohn's handling of his illness revealed both his extraordinary determination and his fundamental inability to accept vulnerability or defeat. Cohn was diagnosed with AIDS in 1984, at a time when the disease was still poorly understood and invariably fatal. The diagnosis was particularly devastating for someone who had built his career on projecting strength and invulnerability. The disease also forced him to confront the reality of his homosexuality, which he had spent his entire adult life denying and concealing. Throughout his career, Cohn had been ruthless in his persecution of homosexuals, using their sexual orientation as a weapon to destroy their reputations and careers. During the McCarthy era, he had been instrumental in purging gay men and lesbians from government service, arguing that their sexual orientation made them security risks. This history made his own diagnosis particularly ironic and tragic. Cohn's response to his AIDS diagnosis was characteristic of his approach to every other challenge in his life. He refused to acknowledge the disease publicly, instead claiming that he was suffering from liver cancer. He continued to work to maintain his social schedule and to project an image of strength and vitality, even as his health deteriorated rapidly. The decision to conceal his AIDS diagnosis was motivated by several factors. Cohn was deeply concerned about the impact that disclosure would have on his legal practice and his ability to represent clients effectively. He was also worried about the effect that revelation of his homosexuality would have on his relationships with conservative political figures and organized crime clients who had supported him throughout his career. The concealment of his illness required enormous energy and resources. Cohn sought treatment from specialists in New York and around the world, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on experimental treatments and medications. He also went to great lengths to maintain his physical appearance, using makeup and other techniques to hide the visible effects of the disease. The strain of concealing his illness while continuing to work and maintain his social obligations took a severe toll on Cohn's psychological and physical health. He became increasingly erratic and paranoid, alienating longtime associates and making decisions that were clearly not in his best interests. His judgment, which had always been one of his greatest assets, began to deteriorate noticeably. Despite his efforts to conceal his condition, rumors about Cohn's illness began to circulate in New York's legal and political circles. His physical appearance was obviously deteriorating, and his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. The pressure of maintaining the deception while dealing with the progression of the disease was clearly overwhelming him. The final months of Cohn's life were marked by a series of legal and financial crises that reflected his declining ability to manage his affairs. He was disbarred by the New York State Bar Association in June 1986, just 5 weeks before his death. The disbarment was based on charges of unethical conduct, dishonesty, and fraud that had been pending for years. Roy Cohn died on August 2, 1986, at the age of 59. His death certificate listed the cause of death as complications from AIDS, though his associates continued to maintain publicly that he had died of liver cancer. The controversy surrounding his death was fitting for a man who had spent his entire career operating in the shadows between truth and deception. Roy Cohn's death in 1986 marked the end of one of the most controversial and influential careers in American political history. While his personal story ended in tragedy and disgrace, his impact on American politics and legal practice would continue to be felt for decades to come. Understanding Cohn's legacy is essential for understanding how modern American political warfare developed its current form. The most direct aspect of Cohn's legacy was his influence on the protégés and associates who carried his methods and worldview into future generations of political combat. His most famous protégé, Donald Trump, would eventually become President of the United States, bringing Cohn's tactics and philosophy into the highest levels of American government. Trump's approach to politics, with its emphasis on aggressive attacks, media manipulation, and loyalty above all else, clearly reflected the lessons he had learned from his mentor. Beyond Trump, Cohn's influence extended to numerous other political operatives, lawyers, and media figures who had worked with him or studied his methods. His approach to political warfare became a template for conservative political operatives who sought to achieve victory through aggressive tactics and media manipulation. The techniques that Cohn had pioneered during the McCarthy era were refined and adapted for use in modern political campaigns and policy battles. Cohn's influence on the legal profession was also significant and enduring. His integration of legal strategy with public relations and political maneuvering helped create the modern practice of crisis management and strategic communication. Law firms today routinely employ the techniques that Cohn pioneered, using media relations, political connections, and aggressive litigation strategies to achieve results for their clients. The media landscape that Cohn helped create through his manipulation of journalists and news organizations also became a permanent feature of American political life. His understanding of how to use media coverage to advance his clients' interests and damage his opponents was far ahead of its time and provided a blueprint for future political operatives and public relations professionals. Cohn's approach to political combat also had broader implications for American democratic institutions. His philosophy that winning justified any means necessary and that loyalty was more important than truth or principle contributed to the erosion of traditional norms and institutions. The political culture that emerged from his influence was more combative, more cynical, and more focused on personal destruction than on policy debate or democratic deliberation. The ethical implications of Cohn's legacy continue to be debated by scholars, legal professionals, and political observers. His career raised fundamental questions about the relationship between legal advocacy and moral responsibility, the role of loyalty in professional relationships, and the limits of acceptable behavior in political combat. These questions remain relevant in contemporary discussions about legal ethics and political norms. Cohn's influence on American conservatism was particularly significant. His brand of aggressive, no-holds-barred political warfare became a model for conservative political operatives who felt that traditional approaches were inadequate for combating liberal political and cultural influence. The tactics that Cohn pioneered were adopted and refined by conservative political organizations, media outlets, and think tanks. The international implications of Cohn's methods were also significant. His approach to political warfare influenced not only American politics, but also the development of similar tactics in other democratic countries. The techniques of media manipulation, character assassination, and aggressive litigation that Cohn pioneered were studied and adapted by political operatives around the world. Roy Cohn's larger-than-life personality and controversial career made him a natural subject for cultural representation in literature, theater, film, and television. His story has been told and retold in various forms, each interpretation reflecting different aspects of his complex character and the times in which he lived. These cultural representations have helped shape public understanding of Cohn's significance and have contributed to his enduring legacy. The most famous cultural representation of Roy Cohn was Tony Kushner's epic play, Angels in America, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama in 1993. In Kushner's work, Cohn appears as a major character whose struggle with AIDS and his refusal to acknowledge his homosexuality serve as metaphors for the broader contradictions and hypocrisies of American society during the Reagan era. Kushner's Cohn is portrayed as a brilliant but deeply corrupted figure whose denial of his own identity reflects the self-deception and moral bankruptcy of the political system he represented. The play's depiction of Cohn was both sympathetic and devastating, showing him as a man whose exceptional talents were channeled toward destructive ends. Kushner's Cohn is ultimately a tragic figure, destroyed by his inability to accept himself and his relentless pursuit of power at the expense of human connection and moral integrity. The character's final scenes, in which he faces death alone and unrepentant, provided a powerful commentary on the ultimate emptiness of a life devoted solely to the accumulation of power. The HBO adaptation of Angels in America in 2003 brought Kushner's interpretation of Cohn to an even wider audience. Al Pacino's Emmy-winning performance as Cohn captured both the character's charismatic brilliance and his fundamental cruelty, creating a portrait that was both compelling and repulsive. The miniseries helped establish Cohn as a symbol of political corruption and moral compromise in the popular imagination. Beyond Angels in America, Cohn has appeared in numerous other cultural works that have explored different aspects of his life and career. Documentary films have examined his role in the McCarthy era, his influence on American politics, and his relationship with Donald Trump. These works have helped preserve the historical record of his activities while also providing commentary on their broader significance. The 2019 documentary, Where's My Roy Cohn?, provided a comprehensive examination of Cohn's life and legacy, connecting his methods and philosophy to contemporary political developments. The film traced the direct line from Cohn's tactics during the McCarthy era to the political strategies employed by his protege Donald Trump during his presidential campaign and presidency. This documentary helped introduce a new generation of viewers to Cohn's story and its relevance to current political debates. Cohn has also been the subject of numerous books, both biographical and fictional, that have explored different aspects of his personality and career. These works have ranged from sympathetic portraits that emphasize his intelligence and legal skills to harsh critiques that focus on his destructive impact on American democratic institutions. The diversity of these interpretations reflects the complexity of Cohn's character and the difficulty of reaching definitive judgments about his legacy. The cultural fascination with Roy Cohn reflects broader questions about power, corruption, and moral responsibility in American society. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the corruption of democratic institutions. At the same time, his undeniable intelligence and effectiveness raise uncomfortable questions about the relationship between talent and morality, and the extent to which exceptional abilities can excuse destructive behavior. Understanding Roy Cohn requires more than simply cataloging his actions and their consequences. His behavior patterns, motivations, and psychological makeup reveal important insights into how power corrupts and how individual pathology can have broad social consequences. A psychological analysis of Cohn helps explain not only his individual actions, but also the broader appeal of his methods and philosophy. Cohn's personality was marked by several key characteristics that shaped his entire approach to life and career. He possessed extraordinary intelligence and analytical ability, combined with an exceptional memory and gift for strategic thinking. These cognitive abilities made him formidable in any intellectual contest and allowed him to process complex information quickly and effectively. However, these same abilities were coupled with a fundamental lack of empathy and an apparent inability to form genuine emotional connections with others. The psychological roots of Cohn's behavior can be traced through his childhood experiences and family dynamics. His relationship with his domineering mother, who taught him that winning was everything and that loyalty was the highest virtue, appears to have been particularly formative. His father's example of principled but relatively powerless judicial service may have convinced young Roy that traditional ethical behavior was a form of weakness that led to irrelevance. Cohn's behavior throughout his career suggests the presence of what psychologists might classify as narcissistic personality disorder. He displayed an inflated sense of self-importance, a need for constant admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. He also showed a tendency toward grandiosity and an apparent belief that normal rules and limitations did not apply to him. These characteristics helped explain his willingness to engage in unethical behavior and his ability to rationalize actions that others would find morally reprehensible. The psychological function of Cohn's homosexuality and his denial of it was also significant in understanding his behavior. His sexual orientation placed him in a position of extreme vulnerability in an era when homosexuality was both illegal and socially stigmatized. His response to this vulnerability was to attack others who shared his sexual orientation, perhaps as a way of deflecting suspicion from himself and demonstrating his loyalty to the heterosexual establishment. The psychological strain of maintaining this deception throughout his adult life appears to have contributed to his increasingly erratic behavior and his inability to form lasting personal relationships. His compartmentalization of his public and private personas required enormous psychological energy and may have contributed to his reputation for ruthlessness and emotional coldness. Cohn's relationship with power was also psychologically complex. He appeared to be motivated not simply by the desire to achieve specific goals, but by the need to demonstrate his superiority over others and to prove his invulnerability. His aggressive tactics and willingness to destroy opponents seemed to serve a psychological need to establish dominance rather than simply to achieve practical objectives. The psychological appeal of Cohn's methods to others was also significant. His approach to political and legal combat offered a way for individuals and organizations to feel powerful and effective in situations where traditional methods seemed inadequate. His willingness to break rules and push boundaries provided a sense of liberation from conventional constraints that many found attractive, even if they were unwilling to admit it publicly. The psychological legacy of Cohn's approach to power and conflict continues to influence American political culture. His methods appeal to individuals who feel frustrated by the limitations of democratic deliberation and who prefer the clarity and decisiveness of combat over the ambiguity and compromise of negotiation. This psychological appeal helps explain why his tactics continue to be employed by political operatives decades after his death. Roy Cohn's approach to legal practice fundamentally changed how many lawyers understood their role and responsibilities. His integration of legal strategy with public relations, political maneuvering, and media manipulation created a new model of legal advocacy that prioritized results over traditional ethical considerations. This transformation had profound implications for the legal profession and continues to influence legal practice today. Traditional legal ethics had emphasized the lawyer's role as an officer of the court, with responsibilities to the legal system that transcended loyalty to individual clients. Cohn's approach challenged this model by suggesting that the lawyer's primary and perhaps only obligation was to achieve victory for the client, regardless of the broader implications for the legal system or society. This philosophy represented a fundamental shift from viewing law as a system of justice to viewing it as a tool for achieving specific outcomes. Cohn's methods demonstrated how legal procedures could be manipulated to achieve strategic advantages that had little to do with the merits of a case. His use of delay tactics, procedural challenges, and media campaigns showed how the legal system could be turned into a weapon for harassing opponents and achieving goals that could not be accomplished through traditional legal arguments. These techniques became standard practice in certain types of high-stakes litigation. The integration of public relations and media strategy into legal practice was perhaps Cohn's most significant contribution to the evolution of legal advocacy. He understood that cases were often won or lost in the court of public opinion before they ever reached a judge or jury. His ability to shape media narratives and influence public perception became a crucial component of his legal strategy and established a model that many other lawyers would follow. Cohn's approach to witness preparation and evidence presentation also pushed the boundaries of traditional legal ethics. His willingness to coach witnesses extensively and to present evidence in ways that maximize dramatic impact rather than clarity demonstrated how legal advocacy could be transformed into a form of theater. These techniques raised important questions about the relationship between zealous advocacy and truthfulness. The impact of Cohn's methods on legal education was also significant. Law schools began to recognize that traditional legal training was inadequate for preparing lawyers to compete in the new environment that Cohn had helped create. Courses in trial advocacy, media relations, and strategic communication became standard parts of legal education, reflecting the broader transformation of legal practice. The ethical implications of Cohn's approach continue to be debated within the legal profession. Supporters argue that his methods were simply a natural evolution of zealous advocacy in an increasingly complex and competitive legal environment. Critics contend that his approach fundamentally corrupted the legal system by prioritizing victory over justice and by encouraging lawyers to view themselves as mercenaries rather than professionals with broader social responsibilities. The disciplinary actions taken against Cohn by the New York State Bar Association represented an attempt by the legal profession to establish boundaries around acceptable behavior. However, the difficulty of enforcing these standards and the continued success of lawyers who employed similar methods suggested that the profession was struggling to maintain traditional ethical standards in the face of changing expectations and competitive pressures. The influence of Cohn's methods on corporate legal practice was particularly significant. Major corporations began to recognize the value of aggressive legal strategies that integrated traditional legal advocacy with public relations and political maneuvering. This led to the development of specialized law firms and legal departments that focused on crisis management and strategic communication rather than simply legal analysis and advice. The international influence of Cohn's approach to legal practice was also noteworthy. His methods were studied and adapted by lawyers in other countries who were facing similar competitive pressures and client expectations. The globalization of legal practice helped spread his techniques and philosophy to legal systems around the world. Roy Cohn's role in the McCarthy era represents one of the most significant and controversial chapters in American political history. His work as chief counsel to Senator Joseph McCarthy's investigative subcommittee helped define the tactics and methods of anti-communist investigation that would influence American politics for decades. Understanding Cohn's contribution to McCarthyism is essential for understanding both his individual legacy and the broader impact of the anti-communist crusade on American society. The McCarthy era began in the aftermath of World War II, as Americans grappled with the reality of Soviet power and the perceived threat of communist infiltration of American institutions. The fear of communism was genuine and widespread, but the methods used to combat it often exceeded reasonable bounds and caused significant damage to democratic institutions and individual rights. Cohn's role in developing and implementing these methods was crucial. Cohn's approach to anti-communist investigation was characterized by several key innovations that would become standard practice for political operatives in subsequent decades. He perfected the use of guilt by association, showing how individuals could be destroyed politically by linking them to communist sympathizers or organizations, regardless of the strength or relevance of those connections. This technique proved devastatingly effective in an era when any association with communism was seen as disqualifying. The use of classified information and government intelligence in public hearings was another Cohn innovation that had lasting implications. He demonstrated how secret information could be selectively disclosed to support political arguments while maintaining the appearance of official credibility. This technique allowed the subcommittee to make dramatic accusations while making it difficult for targets to defend themselves effectively. Cohn's mastery of media manipulation during the McCarthy era established techniques that would be used by political operatives for decades to come. He understood how to time revelations for maximum impact, how to provide exclusive information to friendly journalists, and how to create narratives that would dominate news coverage. His ability to control media coverage was crucial to the success of the McCarthy investigations. The psychological warfare techniques that Cohn employed during the McCarthy era were particularly sophisticated and effective. He understood how to use fear, uncertainty, and social pressure to compel cooperation from witnesses and to intimidate potential critics. His ability to create an atmosphere of fear and suspicion was crucial to the subcommittee's effectiveness in achieving its goals. The targeting of homosexuals during the McCarthy era was a particularly troubling aspect of Cohn's work, given his own sexual orientation. The Lavender Scare that accompanied the Red Scare led to the dismissal of thousands of government employees based on their sexual orientation, with Cohn playing a leading role in developing the rationale and methods for these purges. His participation in these activities while concealing his own homosexuality represented a profound personal and moral contradiction. The impact of Cohn's work during the McCarthy era extended far beyond the immediate political consequences. The techniques he developed for investigating and discrediting political opponents became standard practice for future political operatives. The atmosphere of fear and suspicion that he helped create had lasting effects on American intellectual and political life, leading to self-censorship and conformity that persisted long after the McCarthy era ended. The institutional damage caused by Cohn's work during the McCarthy era was also significant. The congressional investigation process was transformed from a tool for gathering information and overseeing executive branch activities into a weapon for political combat. The precedents established during this period would be used by future congressional leaders to justify increasingly aggressive and partisan uses of investigative power. The international implications of Cohn's work during the McCarthy era were also important. The anti-communist crusade that he helped lead was closely watched by allies and enemies around the world, and its methods were both copied and criticized by other countries. The damage to America's international reputation caused by McCarthyist excesses was significant and lasting. The legal precedents established during the McCarthy-era investigations also had enduring consequences. The balance between national security and individual rights was shifted in ways that would influence legal and political debates for decades. The expansion of congressional investigative power and the erosion of traditional protections for witnesses and targets of investigation created a new framework for political combat that persists today. One of the most controversial aspects of Roy Cohn's career was his representation of organized crime figures and his alleged connections to criminal activities. His client base included some of the most notorious figures in American organized crime, and his methods of representation often involved tactics that pushed the boundaries of legal and ethical behavior. Understanding these relationships is crucial for understanding both Cohn's methods and the broader corruption of American legal and political institutions. Cohn's entry into organized crime defense work was a natural extension of his skills and connections. His experience with high-stakes criminal defense, his knowledge of law enforcement techniques, and his extensive network of contacts in the legal and political establishments made him an ideal lawyer for clients who faced serious criminal charges and needed sophisticated legal representation. The organized crime figures that Cohn represented included members of several major crime families, including the Genovese, Gambino, and Lucchese organizations. These clients were typically charged with serious federal crimes, including racketeering, tax evasion, and murder, and they needed lawyers who could navigate the complex federal court system while managing the media attention that accompanied high-profile criminal cases. Cohn's approach to organized crime defense was characterized by the same aggressive tactics that he employed in other areas of his practice. He was willing to attack prosecutors, discredit witnesses, and use any available legal or political leverage to achieve favorable outcomes for his clients. His success in representing these clients was based on his understanding of how the criminal justice system really worked and his ability to exploit its weaknesses. The financial arrangements between Cohn and his organized crime clients were often complex and controversial. He was reportedly paid in cash, sometimes in amounts that exceeded normal legal fees, and he was known to accept payment in forms other than money. These arrangements raised questions about whether he was simply providing legal services or was participating in criminal enterprises. Cohn's relationships with organized crime figures extended beyond simple attorney-client relationships. He was known to socialize with these individuals, to provide them with advice on matters unrelated to their legal cases, and to serve as an intermediary between them and legitimate business and political figures. These relationships suggested a level of involvement that went beyond traditional legal representation. The impact of Cohn's organized crime connections on his other activities was significant. His reputation for representing criminal clients made him valuable to other clients who needed aggressive representation, but also created suspicions about his own activities. Law enforcement agencies maintained files on Cohn throughout his career, investigating his possible involvement in criminal activities. The techniques that Cohn developed for representing organized crime figures were also applied to his other clients and activities. His understanding of how to intimidate witnesses, manipulate evidence, and exploit legal procedures was refined through his work with criminal clients and then applied to civil cases, political campaigns, and other activities. The corruption of democratic institutions that resulted from Cohn's organized crime connections was also significant. His ability to use his criminal clients' resources and connections to influence political and legal processes represented a form of corruption that extended far beyond individual cases. The integration of criminal influence into legitimate institutions was a recurring theme throughout his career. The investigation of Cohn's organized crime connections by various law enforcement agencies was ongoing throughout his career. The FBI, IRS, and other federal agencies maintained extensive files on his activities and repeatedly investigated his possible involvement in criminal enterprises. While these investigations rarely resulted in successful prosecutions, they revealed the extent of his connections to criminal organizations. The impact of Cohn's organized crime representation on the legal profession was also significant. His success in representing criminal clients while maintaining his position in respectable legal and political circles demonstrated how the boundaries between legitimate and illegitimate activities could be blurred. This example influenced other lawyers and contributed to the erosion of traditional ethical standards in legal practice. Roy Cohn's mastery of media manipulation and public relations was perhaps his most innovative and influential contribution to modern American political and legal practice. His understanding of how to use media coverage to achieve strategic objectives was far ahead of its time and established techniques that continue to be used by political operatives, lawyers, and public relations professionals today. Cohn's approach to media relations was based on his understanding that public perception was often more important than legal or factual reality. He recognized that winning in the court of public opinion could be crucial to achieving success in legal proceedings, political campaigns, and business negotiations. This insight led him to develop sophisticated techniques for managing media coverage and shaping public narratives. The relationships that Cohn cultivated with journalists, editors, and publishers were central to his media strategy. He understood that providing exclusive information, insider access, and compelling stories could earn him favorable coverage and influence over how events were reported. His ability to maintain these relationships across different media outlets and over many years was crucial to his success. Cohn's techniques for timing and staging media events were particularly sophisticated. He understood how to schedule revelations for maximum impact, how to create dramatic moments that would capture media attention, and how to sustain media interest over extended periods. His ability to control the pace and focus of media coverage was a key component of his strategic approach. The use of selective disclosure and strategic leaks was another area where Cohn excelled. He understood how to provide information to journalists in ways that would support his clients' interests while maintaining plausible deniability. His ability to use media coverage to apply pressure on opponents and to influence legal and political processes was particularly effective. Cohn's understanding of how different media outlets and journalists operated was also crucial to his success. He knew which reporters were most likely to be sympathetic to his clients' positions, which editors could be influenced, and which publications would provide the most favorable coverage. This knowledge allowed him to tailor his media strategies to specific audiences and objectives. The integration of media strategy with legal and political tactics was perhaps Cohn's most significant innovation. He demonstrated how media coverage could be used to complement and enhance traditional legal and political strategies, creating synergies that made his overall approach more effective than the sum of its parts. This integration became a standard practice in high-stakes legal and political contests. Cohn's influence on the development of modern public relations practice was also significant. His techniques for crisis management, reputation rehabilitation, and strategic communication were studied and adapted by public relations professionals who recognized their effectiveness. Many of the standard practices in modern public relations can be traced back to innovations that Cohn pioneered. The impact of Cohn's media manipulation techniques on democratic discourse was profound and troubling. His demonstration that media coverage could be systematically manipulated to serve private interests rather than public information needs contributed to the erosion of journalistic independence and the corruption of public debate. The techniques he pioneered were later used by political operatives and special interests to distort public understanding of important issues. The international influence of Cohn's media manipulation techniques was also noteworthy. His methods were studied and adapted by political operatives and public relations professionals in other countries who face similar challenges in managing media coverage and public perception. The globalization of media and politics helped spread his techniques around the world. The ethical implications of Cohn's approach to media relations continue to be debated by journalists, legal professionals, and political observers. His success in manipulating media coverage raised important questions about the relationship between public relations and journalism, the responsibility of media outlets to resist manipulation, and the impact of strategic communication on democratic decision-making. Roy Cohn's influence on the development of modern conservative politics extended far beyond his individual clients and cases. His methods, philosophy, and strategic approach helped shape the tactics and mindset of conservative political operatives for decades after his death. Understanding his contribution to conservative movement building is essential for understanding the evolution of American political combat. Cohn's approach to political warfare was particularly attractive to conservative operatives who felt that traditional political methods were inadequate for combating liberal influence in American institutions. His willingness to use aggressive tactics, to attack opponents personally, and to prioritize victory over conventional political norms provided a model for conservatives who wanted to fight more effectively against their political enemies. The techniques that Cohn developed for discrediting opponents and destroying their reputations became standard practice in conservative political operations. His understanding of how to use opposition research, media manipulation, and legal harassment to neutralize political enemies was studied and refined by conservative operatives who recognized its effectiveness. Cohn's influence on conservative legal strategy was also significant. His demonstration that legal proceedings could be used as weapons in political combat helped inspire the development of conservative legal organizations that would use litigation as a tool for advancing political objectives. The integration of legal strategy with political goals became a hallmark of conservative movement building. The fundraising and networking techniques that Cohn pioneered were also influential in conservative political organizing. His ability to build and maintain networks of wealthy donors, political activists, and influential figures provided a model for conservative organizations that needed to mobilize resources for political combat. His understanding of how to leverage personal relationships for political purposes was particularly valuable. Cohn's approach to media relations and message discipline was also influential in conservative political communications. His techniques for controlling narratives, timing revelations, and coordinating media coverage were adapted by conservative political operatives who recognized their effectiveness in advancing political messages and discrediting opponents. The philosophical underpinnings of Cohn's approach to politics were also influential in conservative movement building. His belief that loyalty was more important than principle, that winning justified any means necessary, and that political combat was a form of warfare rather than democratic deliberation, resonated with conservative operatives who felt that traditional political norms were inadequate for achieving their goals. The impact of Cohn's influence on conservative politics became particularly evident in the 1980s and 1990s as conservative operatives who had studied his methods began to apply them on a broader scale. The techniques he had pioneered in individual cases and campaigns were scaled up for use in national political contests and policy battles. The role of Cohn's protégés in spreading his influence throughout conservative politics was also significant. His most famous protégé, Donald Trump, would eventually become President of the United States, bringing Cohn's methods and philosophy into the highest levels of American government. Other individuals who had worked with Cohn or studied his methods also became influential figures in conservative politics. The institutional impact of Cohn's influence on conservative politics was also noteworthy. Conservative organizations, think tanks, and media outlets adopted approaches to political combat that reflected his methods and philosophy. The transformation of conservative politics from a movement focused on policy and principle to one focused on political warfare and tactical advantage was significantly influenced by his example. The international implications of Cohn's influence on conservative politics were also important. His methods were studied and adapted by conservative political movements in other countries who faced similar challenges in combating liberal and progressive influences. The globalization of political tactics helped spread his influence beyond American borders. Roy Marcus Cohn died on August 2, 1986, but his influence on American politics, law, and culture continues to shape events decades after his death. His life story serves as both a cautionary tale about the corruption of power and a case study in the effectiveness of ruthless political tactics. Understanding Cohn's legacy is essential for understanding the current state of American political discourse and the challenges facing democratic institutions. The most immediate aspect of Cohn's legacy is visible in the career of his most famous protege, Donald Trump. The techniques and philosophy that Cohn taught Trump during their decades-long relationship became central to Trump's approach to business and politics. Trump's presidency brought Cohn's methods to the highest levels of American government, demonstrating their enduring relevance and power. The broader influence of Cohn's methods on American political culture is also evident in the increasingly combative and personal nature of political discourse. The techniques he pioneered for destroying opponents' reputations, manipulating media coverage, and using legal proceedings as weapons in political combat have become standard practices in American politics. The erosion of traditional norms of political behavior can be traced in part to his influence. The impact of Cohn's approach on the legal profession continues to be felt in the integration of legal strategy with public relations and political maneuvering. The model he established for crisis management and strategic communication has been adopted by law firms and legal departments around the world. The transformation of legal practice from a profession focused on justice to one focused on achieving client objectives regardless of broader implications reflects his lasting influence. The ethical questions that Cohn's career raised about the relationship between talent and morality, between effectiveness and principle, remain relevant today. His exceptional intelligence and undeniable effectiveness in achieving his goals raise uncomfortable questions about whether traditional ethical standards are adequate for dealing with individuals who possess extraordinary abilities but lack moral constraints. The damage that Cohn's methods inflicted on democratic institutions and norms continues to be felt in contemporary American politics. His demonstration that democratic processes could be manipulated and corrupted by individuals with sufficient skill and resources has inspired imitators and contributed to the erosion of public trust in governmental and legal institutions. The cultural fascination with Cohn's story reflects broader anxieties about power, corruption, and moral responsibility in American society. His life serves as a mirror for examining the dark side of the American dream and the potential for individual pathology to have broad social consequences. The continued interest in his story suggests that the questions he raised about power and morality remain unresolved. The international implications of Cohn's influence are also significant. His methods and philosophy have been studied and adapted by political operatives around the world who face similar challenges in achieving their objectives within democratic systems. The globalization of his techniques represents a threat to democratic institutions and norms beyond American borders. The lessons of Roy Cohn's life and career are both troubling and instructive. His story demonstrates the potential for exceptional talent to be channeled toward destructive ends and the vulnerability of democratic institutions to manipulation by skilled and ruthless individuals. At the same time, his career provides insights into the nature of power and the importance of ethical constraints in preventing its abuse. The enduring relevance of Cohn's story lies not only in its historical significance, but in its contemporary implications. As American democracy faces new challenges from political polarization, media manipulation, and the erosion of traditional norms, understanding how these problems developed and how they could be addressed requires examining the contributions of figures like Roy Cohn, who helped create the current situation. The ultimate judgment of Roy Cohn's legacy must take into account both his extraordinary abilities and his destructive impact on American society. He was undoubtedly one of the most talented and effective political operatives of his generation, but his talents were used in service of goals that ultimately weakened democratic institutions and corrupted political discourse. His story serves as a reminder that intelligence and effectiveness are not sufficient measures of a life's worth, and that the means used to achieve goals are as important as the goals themselves. Roy Cohn's shadow continues to loom over American politics and culture, a reminder of the potential for individual pathology to have broad social consequences and the importance of maintaining ethical constraints on the exercise of power. His life and career provide essential lessons for understanding the challenges facing democratic institutions and the importance of character and principle in public life. The questions he raised about power, loyalty, and morality remain as relevant today as they were during his lifetime, ensuring that his story will continue to fascinate and disturb future generations of Americans seeking to understand the nature of power and its proper limits in a democratic society.